Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. So I just want to welcome any of you who are new to the conference at this moment, to the show at this moment. Welcome to Fertility Planit. We're so excited to have you here. We're so excited that we're here. Groundbreaking, first of its kind, amazing event with this community for everyone to connect, educate yourself, empower yourself, get expert advice, amazing experiences so that you can learn on your journey. So obviously, you know the topic, but I'll announce it. We are doing today letting go and moving on when parenthood through pregnancy doesn't happen. And we have some wonderful panelists, and our moderator today is, and I just want to make sure you know, at the end we will have a Q&A, so hold your questions to the end, and just know that this is a really safe space. There's no stupid questions. We really want to help you empower yourselves with information. And also, we want to remind everyone, we do have an exhibition hall, which is directly across from the registration where you registered, just outside the glass doors. And there's lots of wonderful stuff going on in there. Some of our panelists have booths. You can speak to them more extensively. And other speakers from other sessions will be in there, as well as other information and products and things you can learn about. So please go visit our exhibit hall. Okay, so first we have our wonderful moderator, Melanie Notkin. And Melanie is an entrepreneur, author, speaker, marketer, and the leading voice of the nearly 50% of American women who are childless. In 2008, Melanie launched Savvy Auntie. Would you say auntie or auntie?
I'm an auntie, but feel free to say whatever suits you.
Melanie launched SavvyAuntie.com, the first online community for aunts and godmothers. The award and she's the best-selling author of the book Savvy Auntie, the ultimate guide for cool aunts, great aunts, godmothers, and all women who love kids. Fantastic title. Okay, and next we have Tracy Cleantis. Tracy is a licensed marriage and family therapist, psychodynamic psychotherapist, and writer. She works with patients with a wide range of issues, and especially those with eating disorders and the stresses and issues that come from dealing with infertility. And next we have Lisa Manterfield. Lisa is an author, blogger, speaker, and coach. As the founder of LifeWithoutBaby.com, she's built an international online community to help women come to terms with being childless not by choice. She's the author of the recently released memoir, I'm Taking My Eggs and Going Home. How One Woman Dared to Say No to Motherhood. Also another great title in the bunch of panelists today. The story of her struggle with infertility and her ultimate decision to create a fulfilling life without children. Dr. Janice Goldman is next on our panel. Dr. Goldman is a clinical psychologist and psychoanalyst, as well as an associate clinical professor of psychology at UCLA. She's been working in the field of reproductive health since the 1980s, helping women, men, couples, and families cope with infertility, recurrent pregnancy loss, high-risk pregnancies, and assisted reproduction. And next we have Dr. Mark Kalin. Dr. Kalin is a reproductive endocrinologist and infertility specialist at the Center of Fertility and Gynecology in Tarzana. Dr. Kalin has presented research at numbers of national and international meetings on topics including polycystic ovarian syndrome, obesity and reproduction, and IVF laboratory conditions. And so that is our panel. We're really excited to have them all here today. And Melanie, take it away.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I'd like to, I know she's not in the room, but I want to thank Karen Thayer for creating Fertility Planit, and everybody, the whole team who works with her, and the panel for coming out today, all extraordinary experts in their own right. Those of you watching on Ustream, and those of you in the room, it's probably one of the bravest sessions to walk into. Because if you're even considering that maybe one day in the future, perhaps there's a little bit of a chance that you might consider letting go, that's a big step. So, and I'm in that step myself. So thank you all for being so brave today, for coming here and letting us share our thoughts and their expertise with you. My introduction was wonderful to give you a little bit of a deeper understanding as to how I come here. I am a 43-year-old single woman. I always expected to be married, to have children. In fact, I had their baby names picked out when I was 12. Buffy and Bonnie, don't judge. They were twins. I liked the idea of some alliteration. That didn't happen. I have yet to meet the one I'm meant to be with. But I know he's out there. And in the meantime, in my late 30s, when I realized that I was not having the children and the husband that I expected to have, I created, as was mentioned in my introduction, Savvy Auntie, which is a multi-platform lifestyle brand for women who love the children in their life, but for whatever valid reason, don't have children of their own. And as I was getting older, I became much more sensitive to my own situation. And I realized that there was an understanding of couples, especially this Generation X, men and women who are getting married later and having children later, and therefore arrive at fertility issues. Because while they might have expected to have babies in their 20s, they're now in their late 30s, 40, etc. There was an understanding to their grief. But my grief, which I've called circumstantial infertility, the grief you have when you don't have a partner with whom to have children, when you don't have a shoulder to cry on, when you know that you are, again, not pregnant, probably because you're not having so much sex. I was just like that. Say that's probably why. The whole Sex and the City brunch thing, talking about the sex you had, they were lying. Anyway, we were talking about our nieces and nephews, hence my company. So I actually write for the Huffington Post Women, and have written pieces that have gone viral: The Truth About Childless Women, My Secret Grief, Over 35, Single and Childless, I Know What You're Thinking, etc. And Savvy Auntie is the celebration of one's maternal muscle. I say that if babies are born from the womb, maternity is born from the soul, and there are many ways to mother. Mm-hmm. And those here, mothers to be here, women who want to be mothers, you know that one specific dream of having genetic children is the one dream you're holding on to. And you're in this room because perhaps that might not be the dream. Perhaps they won't be genetic children. Perhaps you won't have children. Whatever it is, we all have our moments of grief, and we need to begin as a society to understand what those are. And that's what I write about. And I'm announcing now my next book, publisher here in California, Seal, and in Canada, Penguin. It's called Otherhood. And it's the life of women who expected to have the social, political, and economic equality their mothers had to fight for and didn't have. But naturally, husband and kids, they did. I mean, that was obvious, right? Well, it wasn't. So with that, I'm going to begin this conversation with the panelists, but I'm going to give them each a moment to share their story, because many of them here on the panel are not only experts in the field, but have a personal connection to what can happen when letting go becomes the possible next step. So I'm going to start with you, Tracy. Why don't you give a little bit about who you are, how you come to this panel, and I know that you have a very important personal story to share too.
Thank you, Melanie, and thank you, Karen and Fertility Planet, for bringing this topic, very important topic, to this event. When I had visions of coming here today, I imagined that this meeting would be held in the basement, and we'd have a few boxes for you all to sit on, because this is not a topic that I wanted to hear when I was trying to conceive. I didn't want to hear anything except I was definitely 100% for sure going to have a baby. So I truly admire your courage to be in this room and to give space for what if, and that there can be a meaningful and happy life no matter what the outcome is for you. And I'm definitely living proof of that. I'm not an expert on letting go and moving on, because I'm a psychotherapist and I work with patients dealing with this issue. That is a certain expertise I have. or that I write about infertility for Huffington Post or Psychology Today or my blog, La Belle et Rouge. But I'm an expert because I, for 5 years on my own, tried to conceive. And then 5 years further, I spent $100,000 and did everything from 21 IUIs, medicated, not medicated, in four and a half full rounds of in vitro. I went to Maori healers, I went to astrologers, I went to energy healers, I redid my feng shui, I did my qigong, I ate my weight in yams and pumpkin seeds. Whatever you have done, I have done. My legs have been on the wall after sex for 30 minutes at a time. I did everything I could think of to get pregnant, and we were assured over and over again by people who loved us and people who were praying for us and wishing for us that we would conceive, and ultimately we didn't. And I really hope that today to leave you with a message of hope and that no matter what your outcome is, that you can have a meaningful and happy life. So thank you so much for being brave, and braver than I was.
And Lisa, I know that you have your own personal story, and you've written about it, and you have another book coming out about letting go after a long process of having to get to that gate. So tell us a little bit about your background and what brings you to the panel today.
Yeah, I'm like Tracy, an infertility survivor also. I have 5 years in the trenches. And I did what any normal person would do when I was going through that. I wrote about it and published it and told the world all the intimate details of my sex life, including my mother. So, yeah. And then finally, after 5 years, we got to a point, which I will talk about later, of realizing that this was something that I had to let go of, and I had to move forward and find a way to reclaim my life and get on with this life that I had with this fabulous man that I'd finally met, without whom I wouldn't even have been on that journey to start a family, and that we were really not spending our lives together. And so I wrote the book and started blogging about my experience also on a blog called Life Without Baby. And what I found was that there were really no resources out there when I got, when you get to the end of that journey, and you're ready to walk away and start finding yourself again, those resources just seem to dry up. So I started writing about this, and I found a lot of women out there all over the world who were having the same issue, that they had nobody to talk to about this, and no support, and no resources. And so my little blog became an international community in something like 180 countries with about 20,000 visitors a month, which frankly blows my mind just to talk about that. So it made me realize really what a lack of resources there are out there. And so I am now writing about this and offering support groups and workshops, and it's kind of taken over my life in a very positive, in a very positive way. And so that's how I find myself sitting here today, sharing my story with you. So again, thank you for being here also.
And Dr. Janice Goldman, I know that you have people who come to see you who are dealing with this time of thinking about or having to let go. So give us a little bit about your background and what brings you to the panel today.
Okay. I am a clinical and reproductive health psychologist. I'm a psychoanalyst. I'm an associate clinical professor of psychology at UCLA. And since the 1980s, I've been working with women and men and couples struggling with infertility, all sorts of reproductive health problems, perinatal loss, high-risk pregnancies, recurrent pregnancy loss, and assisted reproduction. In my training in the 80s, I was finishing up my training in clinical psych, and I was in the clinic at UCLA, and that's when I first began to see my infertility patients. And it got me really, really interested in that field, in this field. And I became very interested back then in the 80s, the reproductive technologies and the psychological effects of them. So back then, it was, well, amniocentesis And ultrasound was now accompanying, let's say, women who had to have an amniocentesis. So I did some research on the effects of fetal ultrasound on the mother, the pregnant mother, as she went through the pregnancy, and how it affected her attachment and bonding to the fetus inside. And then from that point on, I continued to work with all aspects of reproductive health and infertility patients. I also got some further training and became a psychoanalyst. I think I really wanted to be the best clinician I could be, understand the deepest levels of psychological functioning and emotional pain. And so I feel that's added another piece to my work of understanding, whether I see an individual or a couple just for a one-time consultation, or I work with an individual or a couple over time. Problems of abuse in the past, of trauma, of neglect, all these kinds of things in the past, it's not even necessarily childhood, but even adulthood, I think makes the infertility process much more painful and confusing. So I've tried to help my patients sort through some of these other aspects, because sometimes it can make the process very confusing, so that they can find a more clear-sighted journey and solution.
Dr. Mark Kalin, you're going to give a really very, very compelling slideshow in a bit. So just tell us briefly your background and what you specialize in, and then we'll get in further when you present your slideshow.
All right, well, thanks for having me. My specialty is I'm a reproductive endocrinology and infertility specialist, which is quite a mouthful. So I just tell people I'm a fertility doctor.
That's why I didn't say it.
Oops.
That's what happens when you say that big word. And so essentially I'm a fertility doctor, and my specialty is in all types of infertility treatment, but one of the biggest aspects of my practice, and one of the things I find most gratifying, is working with patients and sort of helping them understand what their ultimate goals are, and defining what parenthood and what having a family means to them. And in some situations, it means being a parent to themselves and the children that are in their lives already. And in some situations, it means using something like egg donation or sperm donation. In some situations, it means, getting a puppy. Life is kind of what we make of it. And parenthood in this modern world is really defined by our own definition, as opposed to maybe what people have always told us what being a parent means. So that's sort of my interest in this field, and specifically I'll talk a little bit about what it means to be a parent from a genetic point of view.
It's really fascinating. So let's dig right in. Lisa, when you realized that you were going to let go, you and your husband were going to let go, perhaps you had decided different times, it might not have been the same moment. Can you describe, was it a moment, was it a stage? How did you come to this decision that you were going to let go?
I think there were lots of moments. There were moments when my fertility doctor had said, I don't know why, but your body just doesn't want to do this. And there were moments that friends had said, are you sure? Are you sure this is what you want to keep doing? And at that time, I honestly did not want to hear any of those things. I was very clear on my path and on my road, and I didn't want to hear that. And then, over the course of time, it became apparent that this wasn't going to work for us. And I think the big kind of eye-opener for me was I realized that, as I said briefly in my introduction, that, here I was. I had finally found this man that I wanted to have a family with and have a life with. And we had been married for 5 years, and we'd spent that entire 5 years of our marriage pursuing a baby. And we weren't, it had consumed our entire lives, and we really weren't living our lives together. And it became apparent to me that if I kept, and you're absolutely right that my husband actually reached that point slightly before I did, and again, and the denial that he was kind of drifting this way, and I was still on my path here. And I think that realization that, you know, I actually already have something that a lot of people would kill for. I have this great relationship, and I'm going to let this go if I keep on this tunnel vision. But I can't tell you that it was a decision and then we moved on, because it wasn't like that at all. It was a long period of, right, that's it. We're going to move on. We're going to figure out how to be a family of two. And then we'd take a few steps forward and then be like, oh, but really? But what about, I'm giving that up. Do I really want to give that up? And so I'd slide back again. And it was definitely a sliding scale of moving forward and sliding back and moving forward and sliding back. And certainly one thing that I really didn't understand at that time was the impact of that loss on me. That I was not going to have children as I'd always planned. And I didn't really understand that that was a loss that I had to grieve, because I think our society, and especially, you know, in our culture where there's always something else you can try. And I'm sure if you've talked to people, they say, well, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Have you considered this? And yeah, I've thought about all those things. And so there's that idea in our culture that there's always something else you can do. There's always a solution. And so for me, I didn't really understand that that was a loss that I had to grieve. And so I think my process was took a lot longer because of that. And I'm very interested to hear that there are, you know, therapists who specialize in this, because I didn't know to ask for help. I didn't know to look for support. I didn't know who to talk to about this. So definitely there were lots of points along the way.
And you bring up a very interesting point, whether you're part of a couple or you're single. You know, what I often get at 43 is, and I'll say, well, you know, and I probably won't have children. Oh, no, my cousin's friend's sister, she was 49, and what, you know, technology is wonderful and it's a gift, and for those for whom it worked, and it worked at the right time, and it worked in the right way, it's really a miracle. But for those who need to grieve and move on, it's a monkey on your back, because nobody will let you let go. And so one of the things I'm hoping that will come out of this session is, if you are ready to let go, which doesn't mean that you have to shut the door and never grieve again, but if you are ready, give yourself permission, and don't let others keep the hope going that may not be hope that helps you live your best life. So let's get to you, because I know that individuals and couples, Dr. Goldman, come to you with this moment of letting go, this time, well, we want to discuss it. And again, perhaps the couples are not in the same place at the same time. And what are the types of conversations that you have? And even more importantly, what do you say to them? What are steps they can take to begin to cope with this new reality of theirs?
Right. So let me begin by saying, you know, letting go of genetic offspring, which is officially the title of our panel here. There's many ways of facing that. So when an individual or a couple comes to see me, it might be that at that moment they have to give up using their own eggs, or they need a sperm donor. So that's the first step, is, you know, having to face that dream, giving up that dream of using their own genetic material, or possibly using an egg donor, a sperm donor, an embryo donor. Of course, after that, it might be deciding to go to adoption. And after that, it might be deciding, as you decided, to not have children. But I think, Melanie, as you've been discussing, and in your writings, there's many ways of being maternal. There's many ways, I would say, of being fertile, fecund, with life, nurturing life, however it might be. But let me just say, though, that there's certain aspects of infertility and having this terrible blow, whether it's not being able to use your own genetic material, or actually never having had your own children, or having children that you're raising. It's a particular kind of emotional and psychological pain. And I wanted to say a few comments about that. I think that it attacks at the deepest level a sense of identity as a woman or as a man, if it's a male factor in fertility. Obviously women were made to have babies. So in a sense, it's a biological attack as well as a psychological attack. So it affects a sense of self-esteem and identity at the deepest level. There's also a feeling of this sort of inalienable right to procreate and have children. I mean, everybody else does it. It's everywhere in our culture. And as you're all pointing out, everybody keeps saying, well, you can do it, it can still happen. The other issue I'd like to raise is when you face this terrible blow, it stirs up all previous losses. And this is what's so surprising to people. Just the way our psyches are, our personalities are, that when we face a huge loss and a blow, a disappointment, it stirs up all previous losses, all previous grief and trauma, whatever it might be, from childhood, from adulthood. And if there's any unresolved grief, that will also be stirred up as well. So it can really be very confusing, especially if one hasn't properly worked through, let's say, previous traumas, previous losses. There's some worries, in particular, that infertility stirs up. For example, are you going to burn out, let's say, your partner, your friends, your family, as you talk about this sort of grief? Are you going to move away from your partner, your spouse? Another worry is, will your partner find another that's fertile? That's another worry. So it can actually lead to a kind of subtle self-devaluation and a self-attack. And it's human nature when one feels helpless to blame. It's just in all of us. It's in children, of course, but it's even in us adults. And you want to blame something. And so sometimes, unfortunately, people will blame themselves. So that leads to more, I think, distress, depression, and devaluation. So it can really create a whole mourning and grieving. And what I say in terms of coping would be, first of all, what I try to do in working with my patients is help them understand the psychological nature of infertility, the particular pain of it, all that it stirs up, and that it's very important to understand that the feelings that are stirred up really need to be acknowledged, expressed, worked through, not denied, not sort of evacuated, not given to somebody else. And that's not a very easy thing to do. So I try to create a space, whether I'm seeing an individual, a couple, even a family, to try to have everybody express their thoughts and feelings. And it's really amazing, because if there is a space to do that, then there can be a conclusion, everybody can end up being on the same page, there can be a solution about the next step. So whether or not one gets psychological help, obviously if one is feeling very, very depressed and hopeless and helpless and it's affecting one's functioning in life, I would recommend that people do get some help. But if you're not feeling that distressed, I would suggest that you find others that will provide you with support, emotional and psychological support, that you also perhaps can accept if your partner, if your spouse, friends or family are limited. Everybody has their own capacity for dealing with emotional pain. So it's important to accept that limit in others, but to be sure to find that support for yourself. And I would say, bless you, that the whole goal is, believe it or not, something good can come out of something bad. I mean, I found this in my practice about everything, quote, bad, painful that we humans have to struggle with. And what can come out of this infertility process is a capacity to mourn and grieve. And I would say, believe it or not, as painful as it feels, as awful as it feels, and yes, it doesn't just go away forever once you, quote, work it through, as you all know. It will be stirred up again. But it gives one the capacity to develop a more mature mourning and grieving process that will really carry one through in life, because loss is in fact a part of life.
I'm going to change the dynamic a little bit and talk about this idea of genetic offspring. Dr. Kalen's going to talk about with his slides, and that is very surprising to me because we talked about it briefly before the panel, and that is we may have an understanding of genetic offspring that may not be exactly scientifically correct. And I think it's very surprising what you're about to talk about, so we're really looking forward to hearing your thoughts.
So I start off by, in this sort of a setting, I hesitate, when I talk about egg donation, I hesitate for it to come off as trying to talk anyone into it or sort of rationalize taking this type of a step. But I think it's important for people to understand egg donation from a more objective point of view. And I think that our societal sense of what our genes are is somewhat miscued. And if you think back 100 years ago, or 50 years ago for that matter, our sense of what a genetic child was is very different than what it is today. So one thing I'll talk about, to bring the slides up, is we all think of ourselves as the product of two parents. That's two people that were the product of their parents, which were 4 people. And they were the product of their parents, which are 8 people, who were the product of their parents, which were 16 people. So if we go back 4 generations to your great-great-grandparents, our presence on Earth depends on a total of 30 different people existing for us to be here. By the way, this comes from a book by Bill Bryson, who wrote a book called A Brief History of Nearly Everything, this sort of public math I'm engaging in here. So this is just an example of that. This is my PowerPoint skills here. But here are every one of us, and here are our parents, 1 generation, grandparents, there's 4 of them, 2 generations, great-grandparents, 3 generations, and great-great-grandparents, 4 generations. So that's 30 people back 4 generations. So we're going to follow this out, and we go 8 generations back to the time that Lincoln and Darwin were born, the same day, amazingly. And that depends on 510 people for me to be sitting here today. You go back 18 generations, time of Shakespeare, and this is exponential growth, so you up to 26,000 plus people. 25 generations back to Henry V, we're talking about 33.5 million people for me to be here. And if you go back 90 generations, the time of the Romans, you get to 1.2 times 10 to the 27th. This is like 10,000 times greater than 1 trillion people that needed to have sex for me to be here today. Now, the problem with that is that, to the best estimate, there's been nowhere near that many people in the history of the Earth. The estimate is there's something like 1.07 times 10 to the 11th. So this is a way fewer number that have ever existed in the history of the Earth, much less number of people that needed to procreate for me to be here. So what that means is that all of my individual ancestors that I claim are not actually my individual ancestors. They're all of our individual ancestors. So we share these ancestors. So your great-great-great-grandmother was also my great-great-great-grandmother. And your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. This is even more significant within religious groups, and it's very obvious when you look at the genetic code, which between humans is literally 99.9% similar. So with this in mind, egg donation, using the egg of another woman, is actually not that foreign. The genes of another woman, or the genes of another man using sperm donation, are incredibly similar to mine. In fact, they're similar because they come from the same place, and they're going to the same place as in a child. So I think with it all in mind, in the words of Sister Sledge, we're all family. So that's kind of my take on that, and I think it's important to think of egg donation or third-party reproduction in terms of that. The best way I put it is our genes are no more our genes than the air that are in our lungs right now. The oxygen that's in your lungs, it's in there for a moment, it's going back out, it's going to end up somewhere else some other day in some other person. So our sort of highly possessive nature of what our genes are, I think, is somewhat misunderstood. That's kind of my take on it.
Fascinating, isn't it? Fascinating. Well, Tracy, you've written a lot about letting go. And I wanted to ask you about that experience and what is it that helped you let go? And if I may add, move on, if that's something that you feel you've experienced.
I let go and move on and hold on and let go and move on and hold on as a continual process. It's certainly healing from this is not a straight line. And actually, the way I think about infertility is as a biopsychosocial syndrome that I will have for the rest of my life that will impact me daily in some way. In so many ways that the panelists have spoken about, the not having the experience of being pregnant, to be a woman and have that experience of being pregnant. I had to let go of that. To have the experience of not having an infant, toddler, child, adolescent, adult child, all of those phases. As I watch my relationships with my friends, how that's impacted my relationships with my friends, because they're in different places and different stages in life, and I feel a kind of developmental retardation that I'm kind of stuck and didn't get to progress past kind of the generativity track. So there's so many places that I find that I'm holding on and letting go. But one point I really strongly want to make is the day before I began my first IVF, I was taking a walk, and this very clear, smart, strong voice of reason came to my head and said, at some point you'll need to stop if this doesn't work. And I thought, ooh, I don't like that. But with each round, with each procedure, at the end of that, I would say to myself, is this the time? And having that was so helpful. I can't tell you. I really, it was I think, so important for my sanity, for my finances, for my body, for my health, to have that question to check in with. There's a very famous couple who is talking a lot about infertility these days. He's an apprentice of some kind, and he recently advised people on the Today Show that to never, never give up. And I had a pretty strong emotional reaction to that. You need to give up when you need to give up. And if you need to give up, it doesn't mean you didn't want it. It doesn't mean it wasn't important to you. And I've actually, a piece I wrote in the Huffington Post about letting go, I got a lot of feedback of, well, you're happy now, so you must not have really wanted it. And it hurt, and I had to quit reading the comments because I really, really wanted it. But I would say what helped me let go was having that question, turning to support. The first thing I did after I called my doctor and said no more was to get online and Google, what do you do after? When there's nothing left. And I found blogs. I found Lisa. I found Silent Sorority's blog. I went to my own blog and wrote about my own grief and my own process, and it was profoundly helpful. The other thing I did was I went to therapy. And I went to therapy, and I cried, and I went through all the stages of grief, and then I got better, and then I did it again. Just last month, I had a period that was a week late, and I went through the letting go and moving on and letting go all over again. I'm 47 years old and went through all that treatment, but there was still something in me that said, maybe. So I had to let go again.
Wow. Beautiful. I think that all the people in the audience and all the people here on the panel come to this with a different experience, different outlook, different stage. But again, as we all said, you're all brave for being here. Now we're going to turn the floor to you. We have about 18 minutes left, and we're going to take about half of that to honor questions from the audience. So are there any questions from the audience? It could be to a specific expert, it could just be to the panel, and we'll manage who might answer it. Yes, there's a question here in the blue.
So I have built a new dream. That's how I put it. I don't say giving up. For me, I don't like to say I quit or I give up. For me, I'm building a new dream. I did have to grieve the old dream of being pregnant, giving birth, but now I'm building a new dream. And so that's what I'm really excited about, is my new dream. And if this new dream does not come to fruition, I will again build a new dream, because my life will continue to move on. That is life, as you said. It's part of loss. And like you said, Janice, that you connect your current lack of fertility loss to some other loss in your life. When I lost my grandmother, I never felt like I lost her. I always speak to her in the spirit world and can say hello to her at any time. So I never feel like I've really lost her. Yes, I can't see her. Yes, I can't touch her. So yeah, I guess it is similar. How I handled that loss is similar. How I handle not, having a baby in my arms right now. And so yeah, I'm excited for my new path and whatever that may hold. And I just pray that everybody else in this room can grab onto some semblance of hope for a new and different future, however you define that for yourself.
It's beautiful. Thank you very much. And that is so true. Yes. Bravo. Bravo.
Don't make me cry.
There's no substitute for your life. And I once thought to myself that my mother wasn't supposed to have me. She was ill, but she decided that my brother should be an only child, and she had me. And I thank God I had her for almost 20 years after that. But I decided that my mother didn't take that risk with her life for me to not live my best life. So think your parents had you, as much love as you have for that child that you cannot have or do not have yet. That is the love your parents had for you. So let's live those lives the best that we can. If there's another question from the audience, we'll take that. This lady here.
Hi. I'm at the point where I know that I'm not going to be able to have my own genetic child, so I'm considering egg donation. And I've had people that have said to me, well, it's never going to really be your child, or you're just an incubator. But then I've had other people that will say to me, but even if it's not your genetic DNA, it's your body that is creating the ear and the fingernails and the flesh and the blood flow that's going through. So I was just wondering if you might be able to address that, and also specifically from a medical standpoint. How much of it do you have any sort of influence on the baby as it develops, or are you really just an incubator?
Right. So that's...
Yeah, about a minute and a half. So.
Yeah. So it's a fascinating question, and so it's when a baby comes out of a woman, that baby, as you said, the flesh is of that woman. It sounds like the Bible or something, but it's literally that fat, cute leg that's made from the nutrients of your body. So there's no question of what that is and who it's from. The other sort of fascinating things about it is that we're, and I'll try and explain this quickly, but there's such thing as a chimera. Chimera is a Greek legend of a half man, half horse. And so we are all genetic chimeras, meaning that we are not purely one type of DNA. All of us have some very, very small amount of DNA from our mothers in our bodies. And all women who give birth to a child, some of their DNA also is floating around within the body of the child. These are free, very, very small pieces of DNA. Now, I'm not claiming that these are active or that they code for anything, but when you are born from somebody, that person they are passing on their body to you. Your body comes from that body. DNA is a very, very, very small molecule. There's nothing to that. There's no cuddling DNA. The baby is the baby, and that comes from the mother. So again, this is by no means meant as a, and I'm very, very careful to explain this, this is not meant as a rationalization or to convince anybody that this is the way that they should go. There's lots of different ways for people to go and people to have fulfilling lives. But when we think about what it means to have a child, it's really important that our preconceived notions of what being a parent or a mother or a father is does not get in the way of us actually becoming what we want to become.
And Dr. Janscombe, I'll give you the other minute and a half.
Okay. It's a wonderful question you've asked, and I'd like to address it at the psychological end, because a lot of people that are considering egg donation wonder about this. And I think ultimately it's the woman's wondering about her capacity to love. Can she love something that isn't totally and completely of her genetic material? The beauty of egg donation, if one is fortunate to have it and it works, is that, you know, the baby is growing inside of you so that you have the potential to bond and attach psychologically and emotionally to the baby growing inside of you. And I would say in my many, many years of experience, the only time that may not work so well, let's say in a woman that's concerned about it, is if one moves too quickly. If one hasn't properly digested, mourned and grieved, and then can move on in a sort of organic way. If it's done too quickly, then I think, from my experience in working with patients, there can be more of a concern about the psychological and emotional bonding and attaching, loving that baby that isn't, quote, 100% your own genetic material.
Do we have any questions from the online community?
We don't at this
We
time,
don't.
so we can keep
So
going.
we can keep it in the room? Is there another question in the room?
I was wondering, I've asked myself lots of times why I want to be pregnant, why I want this so bad. And if I don't get it, how that's going to change things. So I'm wondering maybe what exercises you guys did to help you cope, or maybe if it was just a change in perception.
Lisa, why don't you answer that?
Yeah, I did a lot of rationalization to begin with and had a top 10 list of things that would be better because I didn't have children. And I'm not condoning this as a method, but that's what I did to get myself moving in that direction. I would say find support, whether that's through family or friends, and don't try to go through this alone. Even if you can find one ally that understands what you're dealing with, and really understand that what you are giving up is a huge loss. And it's like any loss of if you've lost a family member, the extent of that loss is the same. The unfortunate thing is that our society really doesn't understand that because it's not tangible. They don't see somebody who was there and then is not there. They don't bring casseroles and send cards and flowers and organize the neighbors to take care of you. Mm-hmm. They really don't. And so find that support somewhere, and then give yourself permission to grieve. And it's the hardest thing to do, to let that grief frankly take over you, and it does, and it's like a wave, and just like any other loss. But just like any other loss, you get through it. You find support, and you come out the other end, and you're okay. And you don't think that you're ever going to be okay. But one day you get up, and you are, right? Mm.
I just realized that I'm missing out on bridal showers, baby showers, and casseroles. And Tracy, I know that you have some coping methods, and part of it I know is to allow yourself to let go, move on, grieve, let go, move on, and go through the cycle. But are there specific exercises that?
Well, yeah, I wanted to speak to your question that I really looked at that in my own therapy when I was in my grief process. What What was the meaning of wanting to birth so badly? And there was, of course, the desire to have a child with my partner and all of that, but there was, for me, a psychological purpose as well, that I wanted to give a child a different kind of life than I'd had. I had a challenging childhood, so I wanted to right a wrong, and I wanted to give a child something that I didn't have. And I didn't get to do that through a literal child, but through that I got to look at how can I tend to myself better? How can I use some of that energy for myself? How can I use that in my relationships? How can I use it in my practice? That there's other ways, and I think if I had not looked at that, it might have been harmful for the child if I had not looked at my own issues in that. So whether a child comes or not, I think it's a really important question to ask yourself. What's the purpose? What's the libido to this desire?
It's a wonderful point. I know for me, again, being a single woman, we all know, I'm 43 now, but there's this time between age 35 and 40 where, because men feel it on the dates and women feel it every day, of this race toward I want to be married and hopefully, you know, get pregnant or have a child, or the possibility of this by the time I'm 40, because God knows my internist, my gynecologist, and anybody related to me has reminded me of this timeline. And when I hit 40 and realized that I was not in a home for childless women over 40, very, you know, depressed and just eating popcorn and chips. And although I do like popcorn and chips, I wasn't in a home for that. I realized that perhaps I was in the wrong race, that this wasn't my race to win. This wasn't my finish line to run through. And when I realized that the path that I had imagined for myself, that I had expected for myself, wasn't the path I was on, that meant that perhaps it wasn't the right path for me, and that I better find what that path was. And I spent the next few years really realizing what my true potential and true path is. You know, it's very important to know that, as one of the panelists said, that just because you are letting go, it doesn't mean that your desire is not true and authentic. And unfortunately, sometimes our friends and family, and I've heard this, and I read those Huffington Post comments too, mind you, which you shouldn't read, by the way. No. You might as well just cut yourself. Just don't do that. If you were really, and I get them to my inbox, if you were really mother material, you would have a baby. Because going back to this idea of technology, there's feminism involved too, because a real modern woman would just do it herself. And there's this idea of, wait a minute, I don't want just a baby, I want a family. I want to look at this baby and see my love's eyes. I want to look at this baby and wonder where he got those fingers from his mother. So we have to realize that sometimes what we expect, as I say, I don't have the life I expected, but I have the life I directed. And I'm ready for my close-up. I'm ready to live that life. So we have just about 4 minutes left. We have a chance for one quick question and one 1-minute response.
My husband and I are in the throes of everything, and in my opinion, we've been very smart the whole way through. We've been seeing a counselor to talk about it, stay open about it. We had a plan. We're not going to throw all our money away. We're going to do this, this, and this. If it doesn't work, we'll move on. The only thing we haven't been smart about is we haven't told anyone. And so when we get to that point where we are ready to let go, we're going to have to share with everyone who hasn't known anything. What suggestions do you have for sharing that journey without reliving it? Or, well, I mean, I guess you're going to have to relive it, but how do, you know, surprise, we're not going to have a baby. You know, like, how do you do that?
It's a wonderful, wonderful question, because they've been cheering you on, and now you have to say you've let the team down, in a way, right? So how do you, who would like, Dr. Golan?
Well, first of all, I would say it's a very individualistic, very unique approach. Like, it depends on how you feel about it, how private you want to be. to what detail you want to tell your family and friends. It may be different than your spouse, your partner, and to be very respectful of that. I would just say, if you feel comfortable, to be as honest as you feel comfortable being, and that, as you said rightly so, that to some degree you will relive it a bit, but that hopefully you can let people know who are supportive. If there are people that you know in your family, friends that are not supportive, then perhaps you think twice about telling them or how much you say, because you have a lot of control over that.
And Lisa, you had that experience firsthand, so how did you share the news?
Yeah, I kind of put a circle of support around myself. And I would really urge you to be, if this is a direction that you end up going, to really be protective of yourself. And within that circle of support, figure out who's safe to bring in. If you know that there's somebody that will react the way that you would hope them to react and be supportive, bring that person in. And if there's somebody in your family who you know is going to say, oh, just get a puppy, it'll be, you know, and I'm quoting from a relative, that person needs to stay out of your circle of support until you are ready, because it is a process, and the first person that you tell will be really hard, and it gets easier. But I think you want to be selective about who you allow into that, your kind of safe zone.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Is there anything left? We just have literally 30 seconds left before we finish up. Is there anything on the panel that you'd just like to add before we close up? Any point that you missed that you didn't get in?
There was a gentleman over there.
There's a gentleman. Did you have a question, sir?
Just quickly, a lot of women start out very, very young, conceiving of themselves like, I'm going to be a mom someday. And it's so deeply embedded in their character that I think they have trouble, and the word conception is very accurate here, because you have to reconceive yourself and think, okay, who else am I? What else am I? Right. And what else can I be? And a lot of women don't think of themselves as like it's like a primary thing. So how did you deal with that in your lives? You know, finding a new way to reconceive yourself.
Tracy, I'm going to leave that to you. I'm going to give you just 20 seconds.
Oh, my goodness. You know, it's a process. And it's still a process that I face, because I have patients who want me to be their mother. So it's something that I'm always kind of coming across, this identity and expanding to other ways of being nurturing without identifying with that mother archetype, that there's other ways, that there's aunties, there's sisters, there's different ways. So.
I've got to interrupt and say thank you to Ustream. Everything's on fertilityplanet.com. Thank you all for coming. You can find us all on the website, more information. And bravo to you again for being so brave today.